what you need to do.
Good evening. Good evening, everyone. The meeting has officially begun. Thank you for the patience and welcome to this community workshop and scoping meeting for the Golden State Specific Plan. I'm Daniel Villa, Senior Planner with the City of Burbank Community Development Department. And again, thank you all for joining. Tonight, city staff in combination with our whole product team that includes DUDEC and AECOM will be providing you an overview of work to date on the Golden State Specific Plan, and we'll be asking for your input and guidance on a draft vision, guiding principles, and land use approach being considered. The Golden State Specific Plan presents an opportunity for the city to plan for the future in a manner that leverages resources in the district to meet the city's short and long-term planning efforts. After our presentation, we look forward to hearing your input and guidance on the information that we will be presenting. And we are hoping to answer any questions that you may have. Our end goal is to make this a collaborative process between staff and the community, through which we aim to facilitate a shared vision that builds on and strengthens the existing neighborhood through responsible development. With that brief introduction, I will now go over today's agenda. Next slide, please. We will begin the workshop with a presentation that will provide a general overview of the project, go over existing conditions of the study area, as well as planning considerations, provide an overview of outreach efforts to date, and go over draft vision, principles, and land use concepts. After the presentation, we will break out into small groups where we will have facilitator-led discussions that will provide you an opportunity to share your thoughts on the draft concepts presented. After the small group discussions, we will reconvene to go over those ideas shared as a larger group. This will be followed by a Q&A period, question and answer period, next steps, and also the Environmental Impact Report Scoping Meeting. Please note that the Environmental Impact Report Scoping Meeting will begin at 7:40 p.m. Next slide. Moving on to some webinar logistics, just so we're on the same page and we know the rules of being in this workshop. You may have noticed that when you enter the meeting, you were automatically muted and your video was off. We ask that you remain muted and with your video off throughout the workshop, with the exception of during the breakout sessions. During the breakout sessions, you will be given an opportunity to unmute yourself and also share your video. During the breakout sessions, you will have an opportunity to ask questions. However, we also encourage you to ask questions throughout the presentation. We ask that these questions be asked by clicking on the chat button and typing in the question. We will attempt to answer as many questions as we can during the Q&A period. Please note that when you ask a question in the chat button, it will be viewed by the host only. The chat button should be located towards the bottom of your screen. An image example is shown on the slide. Additionally, during the breakout sessions, we can facilitate small discussion groups in Spanish, Korean, or Armenian. If you would like to join a breakout session in one of these other languages, please click on the chat button now and identify your first and last name, as well as the language of choice. We ask that you do this now so we can accommodate the request and prepare accordingly. Finally, please note that this presentation is being recorded and will be made available on the project webpage at goldenstatedistrict.com. Next slide. Throughout, as well as following the workshop, there will be several opportunities for you to provide us feedback. In addition to the breakout sessions and Q&A periods that we already identified, there will also be an opportunity to provide feedback during the Environmental Impact Report scoping portion of the meeting, as well as throughout the online questionnaire, as well as through an online questionnaire that will be made available on the project webpage in the coming days. Finally, you are always welcome to reach out to me, the project planner, Daniel Villa, at the email identified on the screen. Please note that a copy of this presentation will be made available on the project webpage following the meeting, in case you don't have time to jot down my email just now. Moving on to a brief overview of the project. Next slide, please. The Golden State Specific Plan encompasses city efforts to create a long-term vision for the Golden State District that would establish policies, permitted land uses, and standards for the future development of the Golden State District. Additionally, as part of the project, the city is undertaking an environmental impact report that will analyze the environmental implications of the project. Next slide. You'll hear us use the word specific plan a lot throughout the presentation. As I briefly touched on, a specific plan is a future-looking document that helps establish and over time implement a city's vision for a study area by guiding future improvements such as private development. Some examples of a specific plan within the city right now include the city's Media District Specific Plan, as well as the city's Burbank Center Plan, which is currently also being updated. Next slide. Before we get into the meat of the presentation, I just want to provide you a quick snapshot of where we are in the processing of the project. The city has conducted neighborhood outreach as part of previous workshops and stakeholder meetings. These outreach efforts will continue throughout the several future milestones of the project. We've also used this feedback received along with existing conditions analyzed and city council feedback to put together a draft vision, guiding principles, and the draft land use concept that we want to share with you today. We anticipate that the project will be considered for adoption by the City Council in fall of 2021. With that, I will now pass it along to Susan Ambrosini with AECOM, who will continue the presentation. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Danny. I'm just going to dive right in because we have a lot to cover. This is the specific plan area shown here. It's roughly 640 acres. It's just east of the Hollywood Burbank Airport, except for this arm here to the south along Van Owen. The eastern boundaries of the plan area are the 5 freeway here and Buena Vista Street here. For reference, this is the Empire Center here. Cohasset Street is the northern boundary, which is also Burbank's boundary with the city of Los Angeles. And the southern boundary here is Pacific Avenue. And this is the Pierce Brothers Memorial property here. So there's several major corridors that run through the district, including Hollywood Way, adjacent to the airport, which connects the district to the 5 freeway, Van Owen and San Fernando Boulevard here. There are also important corridors which run along the rail lines. They intersect the area. We have Winona, Thornton, and Empire, which are the east-west streets in the area, with Empire providing direct access to the 5 freeway. Currently, Empire, Van Owen, and Thornton help access to the Hollywood Burbank Airport. When the terminal relocates, Winona Avenue would play a more important role. The area is remarkably rich in transportation assets. So in addition to the 5 freeway, we have the Ventura County rail right-of-way that supports both Amtrak and Metrolink, with a station just south here of the Burbank Airport. Metrolink connects to the San Fernando Valley, onto Simi Valley and Ventura County. The Amtrak Surfliner route connects all the way up to San Luis Obispo. Then there's a second Metrolink station here. This is along the Antelope Valley line, and this connects the district to Santa Clarita, Palmdale, and Lancaster. And then finally, this is the potential footprint of a future high-speed rail station plan for the area, which is intended to be just here adjacent to the airport. So there's a really wide variety of uses currently in the area. Most of the area is devoted to a mix of light industrial and commercial uses, and these areas are shown here in blue. The area here in this light orange is the residential neighborhood currently. So this includes both multifamily and single family neighborhoods. So as you'll notice, the commercial and industrial uses really vary. So we have media and tech, we have some light industrial and manufacturing, logistics, sort of airport support uses, some retail, hotel and conference. We've got the Marriott property here. We have a mix of various office uses. So there's a real variety of uses in the area. The three of the city's top 10 largest businesses by number of employees are within the area. So we have entertainment partners here. They're a casting and entertainment payroll company. We have Senior Aerospace SSP here. They're an aerospace engineering firm and manufacturer. And we also have Crane Aerospace, who manufactures specialized airplane components. So the area has had a really long relationship with the airport. Beginning in 1940, the district experienced a 50-year period of growth tied to the overall expansion of the aerospace industry in Southern California in general. Lockheed Corporation was the economic anchor. You can see they operated on several large parcels throughout the district. However, as they announced their departure in 1989, it really left the area in flux. So for about a decade, the area sort of struggled to figure out what came next. But starting in 2005, the district has grown or shown job growth ever since. And this has not been so much driven by traditional manufacturing jobs, but by technology and media jobs. A handful of aerospace firms do remain, and as noted on the previous slide, they still provide significant employment in the district. The vacancy rate in the district is now very low, which is great. So this diagram shows the city's adopted general plan land use designations for the area. They govern what land uses are permitted in the district. So currently about 60% of the district is designated for commercial industrial use. About 13% for, this is the area shown here in red, for regional commercial use. You show these areas here for airport use. The areas here, brown, orange, and yellow, are the residential uses. So as part of the specific plan process, the City Council will be considering an amendment to the general plan to update these land use designations to align with the proposed vision of the plan, which we'll be sharing with you shortly. So early in the project, we took a close look at the physical conditions in the area related to urban design and urban form, mobility, and a number of different conditions. So there's too much to share with you in detail, but I'll touch on a few key points. So first is that the block sizes are very large. So that's what's shown here in dark gray. You'll notice that they're more than 1,000 feet in length for many blocks. This is really common in industrial areas because it's efficient for large manufacturing firms. It supports trucks and automobile mobility. However, large blocks are not ideal in residential and mixed use neighborhoods because they impede walkability. In downtown Burbank, for example, blocks tend to be 300 to 400 feet in length, which just makes it easier to walk and drive around the district, to cross the street, and just get to where you need to go quickly. Another condition we noticed is that the lot coverage is generally low. So the gray in this map shows building footprints. And as you can see from the large amount of white space, there are large areas of parcels that are not being used by buildings or structures, but instead by parking lots typically or other outdoor areas. So while this is very common in industrial areas, it tells us that in areas where we might want to consider introducing housing or more intense commercial uses, the land isn't being used very efficiently. So as for the built form, much of the area has older 1 to 2 story industrial brick structures, as shown in some photos here. They tend to be built right to the sidewalk with surface parking in the rear. Commercial structures are a little more varied. So we have the recently constructed, or in the last 20 years, Media Studios North. This is the campus at Empire and Ontario. We also have Entertainment Partners, who I just mentioned. They're about a 3-story structure. They're set back from the road with a large surface parking lot in front. And then we have a structure here like Snyder Diamond, which is more of a 2 or 3-story structure. So they really do vary. And these 2 structures here might have been industrial uses that turned over to commercial uses. From a residential perspective, most of the single family homes in the area tend to be 1 story. And then in the multifamily neighborhood, they really range between 2 and 4 stories. The streets and sidewalks in the area are quite wide and auto-oriented, again, reflecting the industrial past and future as well. But it does reflect an area where walking and biking, for example, have not been common modes. So it's really not comfortable to get around as a pedestrian. So you can see here in some of the photos, the sidewalks are relatively narrow, not great tree canopy, for example. So you're really out there in the heat. Very poor shade coverage on most of the major corridors. There are some exceptions. For example, this is close to the Marriott, near the airport along Hollywood Way. So there's some areas of new development that do have enhanced landscaping and better tree canopy. Another example of just narrow sidewalks. In some cases, there's missing sidewalks. Also of note, Hollywood Way has 2 underpasses, one at Van Owen in the south and the other at San Fernando to the north to accommodate the rail right-of-ways. So they do make accessing the nearby stations by bike or foot more difficult. So we'll be looking at ways to improve connections here. So there are a number of planning considerations that we need to keep in mind when thinking about the future of the area. So one important consideration is the jobs, housing, and balance currently in the city of Burbank. So what this means is that there's about 3 jobs for every 1 household in Burbank. And this means that employees need to travel into Burbank in order to work, often from far distances. And so this really increases commute times within the entire region. So this imbalance has actually increased in recent years. At the same time that neighboring cities like Glendale and Pasadena, it's decreased, and they've better been able to tackle this imbalance by producing more housing. So in response to this issue, the City Council established a goal of facilitating the development of 12,000 units in 15 years. In addition, the state has mandated that Burbank hit a housing target of building almost 9,000 units in the next 8 years. So we also looked at market conditions when considering the vision for the future. So not surprisingly, there continues to be strong housing demand in the region as a whole, but also for this area. Commercial and office demand is also strong, generally regionally a little softer than the housing market, but still some strong demand. Vacancy has been low in the area for many years, and the city is seeing interest in light industrial space, as can be shown by the recent approval of the Avion project within the study area. So finally, the integration of the future high-speed rail station is critical planning consideration as well. So the area's adjacency to the airport means there's some other factors for us to keep in mind. The first are use restrictions, and that's this area shown in yellow. And these are restrictions under the flight path, which include restrictions to residential, but also to higher intensity commercial. There's also height restrictions relative to the flight paths. So it's these areas shown within these red lines, which essentially restricts height to a lesser extent as you get further away from the airport. And then finally, due to aircraft noise, there are some restrictions related to residential uses near the airport. City policy prohibits residential within this purple color here, which has been measured at CNEL class 70. The area shown in pink is not quite as noise impacted at CNEL class 65. So residential is generally not recommended in these areas as well, although could be permitted with certain mitigations. So we're going to be keeping all of these restrictions in mind as well. So from an outreach perspective, we've had a number of activities to date. So they include workshop number 1, which was an open house format that also had small group discussions and a walking tour. We had a business roundtable and stakeholder interviews, which was really important to get a better sense of the business and owner perspective and understand the issues that their employees might be facing. So we're able to capture both the residential and the business perspective between this workshop and the various stakeholder interviews. And then we have a technical working group. So this is made up of several organizations, including city department heads, Metro, High Speed Rail, the City of Los Angeles, and the Airport Land Use Commission. And then finally, we presented at City Council a few weeks ago at one of their study sessions. So I can't summarize all of the feedback that we heard to date, but these are some of the themes that we heard several times. So the area in many ways is Burbank's front door if you're arriving through the airport. So making sure this district puts Burbank's best foot forward was really important to many people that we spoke with. People acknowledge that the district's economy is continuing to evolve and really supporting the kinds of uses that support the airport and that keep the vacancy rate as low and as it is and as successful as the district has been is really important. People asked for longstanding manufacturing uses to be supported. They also wanted us to make sure that people know that people live here. A lot of the district focus has been around employment uses. However, there is a robust residential neighborhood here as well, and they want their voices to be heard. People generally agree that a mix of new uses would be appropriate to allow both more jobs and more housing to the area. A common ask was for amenities. The area does not have many restaurants or neighborhood serving uses to walk to, and it was difficult for both residents and employees to be able to grab a quick bite or run a quick errand without getting in their car and driving outside the area. So sort of in this same vein, these short hops or short trips are as important to these folks as the long trips that they might be taking as part of their commute, for example. We heard from business owners that employees are commuting from far away, including Lancaster, Palmdale, even Orange County. So next I'm going to share with you our draft vision and guiding principles. So these were crafted in draft form based on the feedback that we heard from everyone that I just mentioned. And so we're going to be talking about these in more detail when we go into our small group sessions. But I'd like to share this with you now while we're together. So the draft vision statement is a vibrant economic center and transportation hub that facilitates the preservation of key industries while creating new opportunities for housing and jobs with an elevated sense of arrival from the Hollywood Burbank Airport, Metrolink stations, and future high-speed rail station. The guiding principles, these are paraphrased, but it includes leveraging transportation assets, supporting the airport, better supporting a balance of jobs and housing, building neighborhoods, supporting the district as an economic engine, creating well-designed neighborhoods, supporting a mix of housing types and unit sizes, encouraging a unique district identity, improving safe multimodal connections, and fostering a resilient, sustainable district. So for the next few slides, I will share our preliminary land use concepts. These are based on the vision and principles I just reviewed. The concept includes two alternatives, which we've called the balanced approach, alternative 1, and alternative 2, the housing priority alternative. So this image here shows the concept for alternative 1. The different colors on the map indicate the different land use sub-areas within the district. In just a moment, I'll provide more details on what each of these colors mean. But before I do so, I'd like to just quickly walk through them at a high level. So the areas shown in dark purple are termed mixed use transit oriented development, which is a term that we often abbreviate as TOD. And by mixed use, we mean a mix of commercial and residential uses would be permitted. So this mixed use TOD area I was just referring to are shown here near the Metrolink stations and the future high-speed rail stations. Then we have what's called the mixed use corridor. So this is similar in that it's a mix of commercial and residential that would be permitted. However, it would be at a lower scale, flanking these important corridors of Empire and San Fernando. The areas shown in orange and yellow are the same residential areas that exist now. So the concept would be to preserve and protect these areas. And then we have the areas shown in both light blue and dark blue here and out here. So this is the Golden State Employment and Makers District, which would allow similar uses to what we see in the district now with some changes. Residential would not be permitted here. So the intent of alternative 1 is to provide ample acreage to support employment generating businesses while introducing new housing near transit and along key corridors. Moving on to alternative 2, the intent here is to maximize housing production through conversion of industrial land to residential and by slight increases in housing density. So you'll notice that the sub-area colors stay the same, but there are a few differences between the areas. So you'll see that the Golden State Employment footprint is a little bit smaller. The areas here highlighted in pink in alternative 1 were part of this district, and alternative 2, they shift to the mixed use corridor designation. So this designation would prohibit light industrial uses and would allow residential uses. In addition, though the boundary is not changing in these orange areas, the alternative 2 would allow for a slightly higher density in these two areas. So first I'm going to dive into the mixed use TOD sub areas shown here. So actually backing up a bit. I do want to point out, you can see that there's several large parcels within this area and a lot of surface parking. And so that's what's there now. In the future, the vision is to create new mixed-use commercial residential neighborhoods with uses like office, retail, restaurants, hotel, entertainment within walking distance for both employees and residents. The large blocks would need to be addressed through the addition of new paseos or streets, which bring opportunities for beautiful public open spaces and plazas. Wide sidewalks would be required to support a healthy tree canopy and other sidewalk amenities, which would better connect to the Metrolink stations. The scale would be up to 12 stories to support higher transit ridership, and which would allow us to require a mix of unit sizes to support family housing. So moving on to the commercial and flex TOD sub-area shown here in pink. The vision for these areas are uses that support the airport and high-speed rail station, but that restrict residential due to their close proximity to the airport and runways. So the scale would be a medium scale of up to 5 stories to respect existing airport height restrictions. Larger developments, including the future high-speed rail station, would need to provide public open space, given their location right next to these major transportation assets. So providing this open space would really help create more landmarks in the district, give it a distinct identity, and create that public open space that we really need in an area that's lacking open space currently. We're starting to see changes in parking behavior, so there's an opportunity here to reduce the need for large surface parking lots and more efficiently use our land. And similar to the previous concept, wider sidewalks and a better tree canopy would also be important in these areas. So as I mentioned, the mixed use corridor is slightly different. Land use is slightly different footprint in alternative 1 and 2. So this is alternative 1. And again, in alternative 2, it expands to this area here. All right, so the mixed use corridor would be similar to, I'm sorry, just let me go back here. Just want to make sure, sorry. Wanted to make sure that we were in the right order there. So the mixed use corridor would be similar to the TOD mixed use area in that it would support a mix of uses like office, retail, neighborhood serving uses, and also support an active pedestrian friendly ground floor design and uses. But the vision for the area would be a lower scale. So south of Empire, north of Empire and along San Fernando Boulevard, the proposed concept would be up to a 4-story scale. However, south of Empire, potentially up to an 8-story scale. So the area would also require open spaces and public plazas, paseos in these new developments to help activate the pedestrian experience, the sidewalks, the streets. There could potentially be a new pedestrian connection to the residential neighborhood to the south of the Ventura County Metrolink right-of-way. That's something that a few people mentioned as a way to connect these two residential areas. So our next area I will dive into is Golden State Employment in the Makers District. So shown here in the light blue and the dark blue. So again, this is alternative 2 or alternative 1. Alternative 2 is just a reduced footprint for this particular sub area. So the vision for the area is to preserve jobs and maintain these longstanding industrial employment sectors to make sure that the development standards align with what these businesses need so that we can support high quality design, but at the same time, make sure that they've got the spaces that they need to run their businesses. We did hear that folks would like more amenities within these larger industrial sites. So currently, for example, restaurants are not allowed in this area, but we heard that potentially owners would like to allow small restaurants, accessory kinds of restaurants and retail spaces so people can walk to get these kinds of amenities. So we also heard that even though these kinds of businesses sometimes are more auto-oriented, that walkable, pedestrian-oriented streets were still important so people could navigate the area better as a pedestrian or potentially a cyclist. In general, the concept is sort of supporting what's already there, but really enhancing it and enhancing the design and the walkability of the area. The Makers District is slightly different, and that some of the uses I mentioned that would only be able to be allowed in a small or accessory fashion like restaurants and retail would potentially be able to be allowed as a primary use. And so Ontario becomes the spine of this industrial area and an opportunity for a sense of community and gathering spaces within the district. So next we have residential, which is here shown in orange and yellow. This is the single family area. So the concept here really is to preserve and protect the neighborhood that exists there now, but to potentially improve some design standards. So we get some elevated design in terms of the way buildings face and treat the street. So we can make sure that the sidewalks are nicely designed. There's sufficient tree canopy. Entrances are facing the street, and the overall design of the multifamily structures are what people want to see. As I mentioned, alternative one would be a maximum of 43 DUs per acre. This is a term we use to describe how many units can be allowed within a parcel, but alternative two would slightly increase that density from what it is today, for example. So bringing it all together, this is alternative one here and alternative two here. So now we are going to break out into our small group discussions. So I'll give you a quick overview before you break into your groups. So what's going to happen on Zoom is you will be assigned to a small group and you will be shifted into seeing just the folks within this group. You'll have the ability to turn on your video and to unmute yourself so that you will be within a more intimate environment, which you can speak and have an open dialogue. Each of these groups will be led by a facilitator. This is either going to be a city staff person or someone like myself from the consultant team. You'll have 30 minutes to discuss. We've got a couple major discussion topics that we'd like to go over to get your feedback on. We'd like to hear about the vision and the principles and whether they relate to your vision for the district. And we'd like to get some more detailed feedback on the concepts and also answer questions that you might have on the concepts since I had to move through them pretty quickly tonight. The next thing we're going to do after you've had your discussion is a report back to the larger group. So we'll reconvene together in the same group we're in now. And your facilitator will have a chance to report back to others what you focused on, what the discussion was about in your group. And this is really helpful so you can just hear what other groups might have been talking about to see if they've had a similar dialogue or maybe a completely different dialogue than you had in your own group. So without further ado, Rachel, my AECOM colleague who's helping to manage things behind the scenes, is going to break you into your groups. And we'll talk to you soon.
And Susan, if I can just add, there will be a couple of people, including yourself, Susan, who will stay in this main page or main group on Zoom, just for the purposes of having a discussion recorded for others to see on the Burbank channel. So while many of us will break out into breakout sessions, the group that will be led by you, Susan, will stay on this main room.
Great. Okay, sounds good.
And now, Rachel, if you can please just break us off.
And Susan, your breakout session is all set. So we have a couple of people in the main room still.
Okay.
Kevin, Allison, Lucia.
Okay.
Greg is going to help take notes for you.
Great. All right. So Hopefully everyone can see me okay. Let me just make sure. You guys can unmute yourself if you haven't already. Let me just, if you're not able to unmute, let me know. Let's see, it looks like mute, ask to unmute. All right. I am asking you all to unmute yourself, so just bear with me. Anyone who is unmuted, if you can just let me know.
Hello.
Hi. Muted, if you can just let me know.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Okay. Sorry, it's taking me a moment to get the ask to unmute. I'm struggling with Kevin. To get that there, okay. Sarah, hopefully, and then Kevin. For some reason, I keep asking Kevin to unmute, but I don't know if you're getting that. It might be a technical difficulty on my side. Let me see. All right, can folks hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right, sorry, just working through some technical issues. I'm trying to get Kevin off the mute status, I should say. And for some reason, when I'm asking you to unmute, you're still muted. Rachel, are you able to hear me? Can you look into whether it's possible to unmute Kevin Muldoon?
Yep, I can do that. It could be that he stepped away from his computer and
Okay.
he didn't accept it. So maybe he can just join in and I can keep asking him to unmute.
Got it. Okay, thank you. All right, guys. So why don't we start with introductions? And I'm going to share my screen in just a moment. I'll start with myself. I'm Susan Ambrosini. I work with AECOM. We've been supporting the city in their efforts to update the specific plan. If someone else would like to introduce yourself, just give us your name and what brought you to this meeting tonight, what your interest is.
Hi, so I'll go. I'm Sarna Garapetyan. I'm from IMEC Corporation. We're a engineering consulting firm in Pasadena. And I'm just honestly interested to hear about this project and what are the future plans.
Great. Thank you. Lucia, do you want to introduce yourself?
I think Lucia doesn't have she doesn't have the ability to speak.
Oh, I see. Got it. Okay. And then Kevin might have stepped away. So it might be Greg, Sarah, and myself.
Lucia's on.
Oh, Lucia, you're here. Can you introduce yourself?
Oh, am I unmuted? Sorry.
Yes.
Yes, you are unmuted.
Great. Thank you. Hi, I'm Lucia. I'm with the city of Burbank.
You're with the city of who?
Sorry, there's like a bit of a lag on my end.
No problem.
The city of Burbank. I'm one of
Oh, it looks like we might have lost you. But I did hear that you're with the city of Burbank. So let's get started with some of the questions we'd like to ask the group. So I need to share my screen here. Just give me a second. Sorry, I have to adjust my video here in order to share my screen. All right. So So I'm going to help with some visuals here. Let me know if you can see a slide here that says question 1. Are you guys able to see that?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right. So our first question for you is about the vision. So I know I read it quickly in the presentation just now. I'm going to read it again. I'd also like to go through the guiding principles and just find out if you feel like they're meeting what your vision of the district would be, if there are any changes that you would potentially propose, and just let us know really what's resonating with you. So I'll go ahead and read it. A vibrant economic center and transportation hub that facilitates the preservation of existing key industries while creating new opportunities for housing and jobs with an elevated sense of arrival from the Hollywood Burbank Airport, Metrolink stations, and future high-speed rail station. So before we get into the guiding principles, let's first talk about the vision. So does the vision statement resonate with you? What is your reaction? It looks like Serenay, it might be you and I, unless Kevin gets back on. So take it away.
Sure. I mean, having a new hub in Burbank, it sounds like a great idea, since it feels like a lot of the neighborhoods have become more industrial and just either industrial or kind of suburban and sheltered off. So having a new hub or community where it can feel like there's a younger crowd for more affordable housing is very attractive.
Got it. Okay. How do you feel about the elevated sense of arrival aspect of the vision statement? Does that mean something to you when you're coming in maybe to the airport, or I don't know if you take Metrolink, but Metrolink and the future high-speed rail station, branding a new area or creating an area that feels like a better front door? Is that important to you in the scheme of things?
Definitely. When you land in Burbank, it seems very disconnected from the palm trees or that Los Angeles feel. And you just immediately get to the taxi or Uber area. So I like that wording of elevated sense of arrival. It's very,
Okay, so that speaks to you.
It speaks to me, but it also took me a couple of times to read it to get a visual of what it means.
Okay, great. So, and it sounds like the sort of economic center transportation hub, that was meaningful to you. What are your thoughts in terms of new opportunities for housing and jobs, or the aspect of creating or facilitating the preservation of key industries?
Creating new opportunities for housing and jobs is definitely a great point. It's one of the main things that I saw on the website that made me feel like I would love to participate in this discussion. And preservation is always important, especially in Los Angeles. I feel like we can definitely do more of that instead of demolitions and starting from ground up.
So reusing, even if a business turns over, reusing that building for new use,
or turning it more into mixed use areas, especially right now with everything going on and people really not being in the offices and needing more open space. I think it would be a pretty attractive pull.
Okay. All right. That's helpful. So let's go ahead and move on to the guiding principles. And you know what I'll do, since it's really just you and I talking, I'm going to give you a moment to read the full guiding principles, which is a lot to take in. I know that's a lot of words, but since it's just the two of us, let's go through some of them more quickly, just so you understand some of the nuance. So the first guiding principle is about making sure that we're leveraging these transportation assets that we have in the area in terms of having the right land uses, that we're taking advantage essentially of the transportation assets.
It definitely helps having these words highlighted in big column.
Yeah, I know, it's a lot. And I mean, I can go back up to the previous slide, but if
no, it's okay.
Okay.
I think what I'm curious about is what is the specific question, or what would you like to have feedback on, really? Because
Yeah, okay. Good question. So let's see. One question we have is about housing types and unit sizes. So a lot of people can't afford single family homes. And so providing a really nice mix of different types of housing. So whether it's a smaller scale kind of multifamily setting in a 2 or 3 story building, or in a higher density kind of area that might have taller buildings, but more amenities like a pool or public space and sort of the coffee shop right there on the ground floor. Do you like the idea of adding a variety of new housing types in the area?
I think it's a great idea. I personally am always looking into more of a city feel when I'm thinking about moving, because it's just so hard to walk around in Los Angeles, and it's something that we're missing. And after the lockdown, having the ability to walk around your neighborhood and feel safe, but also have access to a pool in your apartment building is something that a lot of people would get selective about or both about. I think having variety is always important, but creating a community or a neighborhood where people can easily walk around, have that access to transportation, will be very new to LA. And so
Yeah.
it's great. All of this sounds great.
And I'm curious, did you come from a different city?
Yeah, I actually grew up in Armenia, and I lived in upstate New York for college. And currently I've been living in Glendale for around 4 years now.
Great.
So biggest
What
downfall.
perspective do you get in Los Angeles because people come from so many interesting places?
I definitely miss walking.
Yeah, more opportunities for walking. Okay, so John just joined our group. I'm trying to ask him to unmute. John, if you can hear us, can you unmute yourself?
Yes. Hi. I'm sorry to join you late. I was on another.
No problem.
But thank you for having me.
No problem. We're happy to have you. Did you hear the presentation, or are you brand new to the discussion?
No, I just came in just now because I was on another board meeting.
No problem. So it's 3 of us. It's myself, Susan. I work with the consultant, AECOM, Sarah Ney, who we've just had a good discussion with, and yourself. So it's just a few of us. We don't have a lot of time. One thing I was just sharing, and I can share with you, hopefully you can see my screen. So this is the vision statement for the area. And it's followed up by some guiding principles. And so if there's anything that jumps out at you as something that you particularly resonates with you, sorry to throw this at you quickly, but just looking at these principles, do you feel like you agree with what you're seeing here, or is there anything that that you feel like it is not resonating with you? Are you able to read this on your screen?
I could see your diagrams and your pictures. Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right.
By the way.
This is my son, George.
Yes.
We're attorneys in the same office here.
Yes, that's right.
Oh, great. Okay, perfect. 2 for 1.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, let's just sort of move on. The principles and and the vision are on our website. So in the interest of time, you can just go view these on the website, and then we have a very quick survey you can answer, and you can let us know if you feel like this vision and principles resonate with
And
you.
Susan, just to let you know, I brought
Yeah.
myself up to speed by looking at the July council presentation, which was very
Perfect.
good. Mhm.
Okay, great. So you, I think, got the gist of what I presented tonight.
Good.
All right. The next question for you guys. So this, as a reminder, this is alternative one. We might not have gotten into the two alternatives in the city council presentation. So I'll just sort of rehash right here. This alternative one is focused on sort of maintaining a larger footprint for employment uses, and then focusing on new housing in these dark purple areas, as well as in these pink areas. And then in alternative two, there'd be more residential and mixed use allowed in these corners, and a slight increase in density here. So do you feel like these alternatives resonate with you, just the concepts behind them that I walked through in the presentation? Is there anything that you felt like you liked or didn't like? And feel free, I know that I had to go quickly in the presentation, so if you want to take this time to ask me questions about the sub areas, feel free to ask questions too.
I have one question.
Sure.
The housing element, which was very important, and
Yeah.
the city wants more housing in certain areas there, and I'm familiar with that area. I have a project on Naomi right now
Okay.
that we're working on, that we have pretty much approval on. It's 2 lots, and it's going to be 8-unit project on grade, semi-grade.
Uh-huh. Okay, so sort of right here where my mouse is?
It is, yes, indeed.
Okay.
And it's on
Yeah.
a street where there's residential on one side, but mostly apartments on the other side. And I was pleased to see that the area is changing and that things are developing and that new housing is coming in. We used to call that area, the unwanted area, like the black hole or whatever people refer to it as, because it was not in a residential district that was recognized. It was surrounded by industrial and commercial. So I'm glad that things are changing there and moving, and obviously the major projects that are happening around. Thank you.
So that's an interesting question. So do you have a reaction in terms of alternative one versus alternative two, given this is right near your project, in terms of maintaining this space for employment serving uses versus this approach where you would be allowed residential in these areas? Do you have thoughts about that? Well,
I think that as the area fills in, you'll know more as time goes by as to what the demand will be in the coming years. And it's a mixed area. So if there's more demand for creative or light industrial, then it'll fill in. But housing is good, and it's a good. I feel it's a good mixture.
And might I add as well?
Yes.
I'm a big proponent of converting industrial and retail and commercial space to residential. I think that is that's a very big trend. And I think that allowing it and seeing if the market provides it is a very good way of approaching the issue.
Step by step, just to see how you what kind of response you get and who wants to develop. Now, I have to tell you that I'm on a committee opposing RC, which is the Initiative for Rent Control. And I see that as being an impediment to bringing in developers and people. And, it even puts a damper on the people who have approval to do projects as to whether or not they're going to be controlled by this commission that has no oversight. I mean, it's a very severe thing that we're facing. And I think it's very bad for Burbank. And George and I just wrote an article for the AOA, Apartment Owners Association, which will probably come out next month. And I'm in a committee with other very interested parties and landlords and so forth, because we don't want to see our town being quote, not open for business, because that's exactly what that rent control issue is going to do for Burbank. We've never had a problem before. We didn't need rent control. We got the state already governing rent control. And we see that this was proposed by someone who's running for city council and using this as a stepping stone to his candidacy. That's all I want to say.
Got it. And so, and you develop housing, is that's your job focus?
Well, we're full-time attorneys, but we do.
Oh, that's right. You mentioned that you're attorneys.
And
Okay.
I got other projects on the board right now for
Got it.
residential.
Okay. And then, so Saranae, what are your thoughts in terms of your reaction to the two alternatives? Do you feel like you're leaning towards one or the other?
Oh, she's muted.
Yeah, I'm just asking her to unmute there.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I don't know why it doesn't let me unmute.
You know what? I think sometimes you'll automatically be muted after like a minute of not talking. So that's probably what happened.
It's all right. Just looking at these two, I don't personally have a strong opinion because of how unpredictable things are right now. About businesses, are they going to be able to open the way that we know, or is there going to be more need for single family housing? So I would probably just stay out of this one.
No problem. All right. Well, then we have a minute or two before they're going to pull us, actually longer than that. Greg, can you do a time check for me? Let's see, we're 7:02. We're going to be pulled
I think we have about
8 minutes.
15 minutes. If this thing is correct, it says 7:20 when we're heading back, right?
Okay. All right. So I am actually going to share the presentation then that I gave, so we can get into some more of the details and talk about the alternatives. So I am going to scroll ahead here. Take advantage of the fact that we're a smaller group. John, are you taking in every single slide at this fast pace? Okay. So let's start with this mixed-use TOD area, because this is the area that is changing the most from what would be on the ground now. So this is the Fry's site with a parking lot here. This is an office building with a large parking lot, some sort of smaller industrial uses. This is the Marriott, a lot of surface parking. So the vision for this area is potentially up to a 12-story scale. So these are some examples of a 12-story building. In this case, it sort of tapers down to add some variety architecturally. If you go to this higher density, it does allow developers to be more able to pay for public open spaces. So that's an advantage to using that kind of scale. And we are looking for some better connections to the Metrolink stations in this area here. So the Metrolink station is up here and then here. And so allowing these sites to turn over at these densities so we can create public plazas and really nice, well-maintained open spaces is the idea. One of the things we mentioned in the presentation is these are very large block sizes. And so we would need to start to create more potential to sort of permeate into the blocks through new streets or paseos, paseos is a planning term that refers to just pedestrian only streets, often narrower streets, to potentially just improve the access maybe through this block, this way and this way. So that's the idea. One thought in terms of mixing of unit sizes is when you get larger developments, some cities have opted to require developers to do a certain number of three or larger bedroom units to try to address the need for family housing, which just doesn't get produced as much sometimes in these developments. So we're looking at potentially having some type of requirement to make sure that these larger units are being produced. You know, and maybe we'll start to see trends post-COVID with people working from home, that these larger units are more desirable than they have been previously. And then really improving the public realm with wider sidewalks and better tree canopy. What is your reaction to this sub area? What are your thoughts?
How far away is this from the runway? Because there's a height restriction, isn't there?
Yes. So, good question. Let me just, I hope I'm not making you dizzy.
Mhm.
The noise contours. So, this purple right here is the 70 CNEL area, and the pink is the 65. So looking at the site, for example, here, you can see this is the Fry's site. A portion of that site, you really don't want to do residential, but this portion you could potentially. And so what we've done with the concept is really draw this line here where residential could work, and then it really wouldn't work because of noise issues. So you still might want some mitigation for noise. It doesn't mean there's not going to be any airport noise just because you're not 65 CNALs. So there would need to be some mitigation and some creative site design potentially to make sure that the open spaces maybe have some noise mitigation as well. So it's not just indoor mitigation. But so there, in terms of this area up here, because the runways are going this way and this way, the noise contours up here are really not, there's not much of an impact in these particular sites.
Susan,
Yes.
if I may suggest, I think the Makers District land use would be really interesting to our attendees here.
Yeah,
It seems like it would be right up their alley to talk
good
about
point.
it.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so let's go through this in a little bit more detail. So this would be the footprint of the light industrial commercial area. The idea behind the Makers District is that there's some unique urban fabric here. I'm sorry to use the planning jargon, but essentially a more narrow street with 1 and 2 story older industrial buildings that create a really nice character along this street. So it sort of feels like the hub, what could be the hub of the area. And so while we don't necessarily want to open up restaurants or certain retail uses to this area because they tend to undermine employment generating uses. And we already have, for example, the Empire Center nearby. So we wouldn't necessarily want to open up these kinds of uses for the whole area, but maybe along this spine along Ontario or here along Thornton, so that you have neighborhood serving uses, restaurants, amenities just across from this residential neighborhood here and not too far from this residential neighborhood here where your new site is, for example, and then in a short walk to potentially this hub. And so the idea here is that you could do a restaurant, potentially live work unit. So there might be some limited residential, although that might not, we're still looking into the use restrictions. And so live work might not be an option. And also maybe some limited retail type uses here. So that's the general concept. From a scale perspective, it would still be relatively low scale. So sort of in that 2 to 3 story range, really at the most. The FARs are listed down here. So it would be 1.75. The Makers District would be potentially 1.25. We have to figure out what the use restrictions are and revisit that. But it wouldn't be, tall office buildings, for example. It would be lower intensity. But what we'd like to do is, even though some of these uses are auto-oriented, make the streets more walkable and more pleasant so that when you're in the district, if you're working here at Crane, for example, you can walk out, take a nice stroll, maybe visit some open space and, a coffee shop or what have you on your lunch hour. Because right now people are getting in their cars and driving to the fast food establishments over here or even the Empire Center. So that's the general vision. What are your thoughts?
Are there any hotels planned for the area other than the existing hotels?
My understanding is that Marriott is potentially looking to expand. They're the only hotel application that I know of. The Avion project that is being developed right here does include a small hotel as well.
John, certainly you're welcome to contact staff to see if we have any applications pending for different kinds of uses.
Mm-hmm.
The new project of, is that going to have industrial space as well?
Yes, it will. Yep.
Okay.
I'm seeing other folks come back into the room, so I think our small groups are reconvening. So I'll just wait one more minute and we can start the report back.
Hey, Susan, this is Fred.
Yes.
We were in the middle of question number 2 when we got pushed out. So
Uh-huh.
I only had 2 people, but I wanted Marva Murphy. Didn't get a chance to chime in on the second question. So if we have time, as we're transitioning back, maybe just to give her an opportunity to chime in. That would
Sure. Marva, why don't you go ahead and then we'll start the report back when you're done. Marva might be muted.
Yeah,
she went back into the room.
I'm okay. I just got unmuted.
Cool.
Sorry, Marva.
No problem. There's lots of people that really would like to be able to have that kind of control over me. So, are we in our room, our little chat room?
We are not Marva, but you can. But because we didn't give you a chance to chime in, I think you're in good company if you chime in on question number 2, which was what of the 2 alternatives do you think? What do you think about both alternatives? Starting with the first one.
Okay. Well, first of all, I've tried to get from Victory Boulevard to the 5 freeway during rush hour in the existing state it's in, and gone crazy because of all the traffic that backs up along those 2 entryways to the freeway. So when you're talking about high density and increasing this, that, and the other, I'm just seeing a nightmare. So I'm wondering what kind of, traffic impact is being considered for this area within some of these proposed build outs. Secondly, from the residents outside of the exact area, the Golden State area, if you're putting in these high-rise dense buildings for housing and mixed use or whatever, what does it do to the view of the people that are along this area? Does it block the mountains? Because many people enjoy the living in Burbank because they have the ability to look out their windows and see nothing but nice, beautiful, well, unless they're on fire, but the mountain views in the areas. And that's part of the beauty of the area. That's what sells the community. And we've seen that happen up on the hillside where the McMansions got built before codes came in and destroyed people's views. So, and lots of people were not happy, which has resulted in the McMansion codes that came into play. So I'm just wondering about that, what kind of protests there might be from the neighbors that live around the specific area that would have their views blocked by the high-rise buildings. I'm not really sure 1 or 2. I'm liking the idea of starting with 1 and allowing for the possibility of having the 2 plan to grow into. But I'd have to see a lot more detail about what they're actually considering to put in there.
Very good.
That's
Thank you, Marva.
for me. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Susan.
All right. Thank you.
And Susan, sorry, if I can just add, I was in a group with Roy Wiegand, Lindsay, and also JG, and we did get cut off also through, as we were going over the second question. Roy, Lindsay, JG, I do encourage you to reach out to me after this meeting, maybe tomorrow, sometime this week, and we can finish our discussion separately, so I'm able to get your input. So again, I do apologize, but again, please reach out to me. I can provide you my contact information, or you'll see it throughout this presentation. My email will be on here. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Danny. All right, so let me just move ahead here to the report back. Does one of the facilitators want to volunteer? I think, Rachel, correct me if I'm wrong. I think we have 2 minutes to report back for each facilitator. Is that right?
Yep, that's right.
Okay, great. So who would like to start? Scott?
Hey, Susan, this is Gaurav.
Yes.
Scott was in the room breakout session with me, and I was facilitating. So I am happy to volunteer to go first.
Okay, go for it.
Awesome. All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Gaurav Srivastava. I'm on the consultant side working with the city on the specific plan. I was in a breakout session with 4 participants, Juan, Shilpa, Jenny, and Brian. We had a fantastic conversation. And I'll just quickly summarize in 2 broad buckets what we heard and how we ended up prioritizing things. So I'll start with the vision statement. Generally, across the board, the vision statement as written up was appreciated. What was further appreciated is the emphasis that was placed on the modes of access to the district. What was also appreciated is the emphasis on additional housing, because some of our participants felt that the future benefits that will flow to the city from additional housing are significant. There was a suggestion that we should maybe embed in the vision statement emphasis on intra-connectivity within the district, and to emphasize the need for better ways, especially for pedestrians, to get to destinations within the district. We also heard from a couple of participants the need for the vision statement and generally the plan to address the arrival experience into Burbank in more depth. It was felt that the current arrival experience is quote unquote an eyesore, that the people coming into Burbank, either from the airport or the Metrolink stations, are confronted with industrial buildings that could really belong anywhere, and that there is a distinct lack of places and a more urban city feel that would be a more relevant experience for someone arriving into the city. Moving on to the alternatives. Of the 4 participants, 3, I think, clearly expressed their preference for the housing priority alternative. And the reasons we already discussed in the vision, just the need and benefits of housing for future housing production. One participant liked the balanced approach and felt that it brought a win-win situation for both the jobs-oriented uses, but also for the future housing uses. The planning approach that we've outlined by emphasizing the TOD and transit adjacency for future housing was also appreciated. We also heard some support for the Makers District, and there was a suggestion that we should connect the Makers District to the TOD areas, and that ties back to some of the pedestrian walkability and connections that we heard in the first discussion. And I think that's generally it, unless I missed something and if one of the participants wants to jump in and add. If not, I think that was our group discussion.
Okay. All right. We have limited time, so we should probably move on to the next group. Who's another facilitator who could?
Susan, I can chime in.
Great.
Just in follow up to Gaurav, I think a lot of what he touched on was discussed with our 2-member breakout session that had Alec and Marva on. But real quick, an emphasis on housing that is affordable to families, affordable to very low and low income households, to kind of balance that with what they may see as a concern with just market rate housing being built. Expand the percentage of what those housing units are that are built at those lower, more affordable levels. The effort to build housing, they felt was consistent with the city's housing element. ADA accessibility was really important, something that really focus in on as we're developing and building neighborhoods and protecting them. Also, they like the idea of expanding the amenities. The more amenities, the better, for the benefit not only of the residents, but the businesses. And the only thing, the cautionary thing that was noted was just to make sure that if we do introduce kind of similar downtown uses, whether it's service commercial uses or others, that they don't kind of siphon away business from the downtown, which there's a concern that that may happen or could happen. The other thing that was brought up was a really good point that maybe look at the possibility of some sort of transit or bus circulator system that would benefit the neighborhood as well as the businesses. And in addition to that, there was an interest from members of our group to see mixed use residential development at higher densities in the focused areas, but to do so in a way that would benefit those areas with increased traffic in the positive side of it, and future patrons that would actually go to maybe those businesses that are in that mixed use arena. When it came to the balance approach and the alternative 1 and 2, I think you heard Marva speak before, but in particular, it was interesting. I think both were interested. They called it a hybrid approach, but it was really kind of a phased approach, I think, to maybe start with alternative 1 as far as the land uses, but still consider the possibility of looking at those areas that are being upzoned for residential development, where right now it's industrial. So there was some discussion regarding that as far as an opportunity. And as noted, there is a concern with the height of buildings that are being proposed in the areas, and any potential impacts to traffic associated with it, as well as impacts of scenic views towards the mountains. And I think that was the gist of our group.
Great. All right. Were there any other facilitators? I was one too, so I can share, but I'll go last. So am I missing anybody?
Susan, I can go next.
Great. Go ahead.
So in my group, there was 4 of us, and we weren't able to get through all the questions, but the ones that we did get through were the vision, the guiding principles, and generally speaking, there was, I would say, there was 2 different points of view. One of the points of view was believe that the vision was something that is reflective of what they believe is good for the future of the area, something that they resonated with. And they also asked they were also interested in understanding whether, as part of the plan, we can actually include TOD, transit-oriented development benefits, for development that is in close proximity to transit, for example, the Metrolink stations, the possible future high-speed rail station. Then there was, in addition to that, there was also comments about how we need to look at bicycle infrastructure, bicycle improvements in the area, and how we have to establish ways of connecting the bicycle infrastructure to other bicycle lanes, for example, in other parts of the city, so that you don't have bicycle infrastructure that dead ends in a non-destination point. There was also the other side of it, which is there was some concern. There was concern from some of the speakers regarding what this can mean for the area. For example, you have higher intensity development, that in combination with the proposed airport terminal, with Avion, with other development that may come in the future, or tenants that may come in the future. There's a sense that combined together with this specific plan could create potential impacts, such as traffic impacts, air quality impacts, so on and so forth. And there was also comments that were just identifying that there are concerns that this could impact some of the existing single-family neighborhoods, given that you do have higher intensity development potentially, and as a result of that, you can have things like more traffic. So big picture, that's what we covered. And again, we weren't able to get to all of the questions.
Got it. All right. Thank you. Were there any other groups? Don't think so. Okay, I'll go ahead. So we had a group with three folks. We had a good conversation. We did get through our questions. With respect to the vision, the word hub really jumped out to one of the team or group members because they like the idea of building new communities and creating a center hub that people can go to with just new energy, new crowds of people. So that really resonated with them. Also this idea of this elevated sense of arrival and in the guiding principles, the Burbank's front door really made a lot of sense to them because they agreed that the area is not putting the city's best foot forward in terms of the impression that it gives to folks as they arrive. They also mentioned the idea of reusing jumping off this word preservation. So not just preserving the existing industries in terms of jobs, but also in terms of the building stock and really liking to preserve some of these old industrial structures for new uses. So those were the big comments related to guidelines. We did end up spending probably more time talking about the alternatives. So both of the folks in our group, one didn't have a strong opinion and didn't feel like they wanted to interject on which one they preferred. A couple of the folks in my group felt like, sort of in the same vein that Fred was saying, potentially this might work in the short term, but maybe having some flexibility that watching the market and things might shift towards something closer to this in the long term. Someone else also mentioned that they really like the idea of variety of housing types and a more city-like feel that you can walk around. Particularly after the lockdown, they felt like just having that sense of a neighborhood and amenities to walk to, and even having the kind of development that would produce amenities like pools and nice open space has suddenly become really important to people. So that just on-site common and private open space is really important to them. Let's see. I think that's really the gist of feedback. So I'll just leave it at that. And I know we're scheduled to sort of jump into the Q&A session. So the way it's going to be structured, hopefully, as Danny mentioned earlier, you can type any of your questions into the chat. And my colleague Rachel will be reading them out loud. And then myself or city staff can answer the questions coming in. So Rachel, I'll turn it to you. Are there any questions in the chat that we can start to answer? And then just real quick before we get into that, in about 10 minutes, we'll be starting the EIR scoping portion of the presentation where our CEQA colleagues will be presenting a few slides and answering questions more specific to the environmental impact process. So Rachel.
Yeah, so as of now, there's no questions in the chat. I just put a message in to type your question in the chat in case that pops up for you in your window. So feel free to put any comments or questions in there and we can answer them during this time.
One thing we can do too is have our CEQA staff start giving their presentation as well. And then we're going to open it up to Q&A after they present too. So you're welcome to always ask questions that are not related to the environmental portion of the presentation. So if you stick around for the CEQA slides and you think of something that you'd like to ask, you're definitely open to asking as well. But let's just give it 1 minute to see if anything comes in specific to what we've discussed so far.
There is a question with regards to traffic impacts. So the question or the comment is the Avion project got failing grades for traffic impacts. How will this make traffic better?
Yeah, I can start to address that. So making traffic better is sort of a complicated statement. I think what we're trying to do is create housing close to transit and offering opportunities for people to not be getting in their car to take both their short and long distance trips. And so being really smart and strategic about where this new housing is located and offering people a variety of options for getting around to address some of the traffic that people are feeling now. Earlier in the presentation, I mentioned this jobs and housing imbalance. Right now, there are a lot of people driving into this district and into Burbank in general from really long distances. And so if some of these folks are able to actually live in the district or live nearby, that will certainly help as well. If any folks from the city or CEQA staff want to jump in too, just to talk about, or Gaurav as well, feel free to pipe in terms of traffic and traffic impacts.
And Susan, I'll just jump in just to also get a little bit ahead of the game with regards to the environmental impact report. But just to be clear, what we are looking at through the processing of the specific plan, we are going to be preparing an environmental impact report. That report is going to look at potential environmental impacts that includes traffic. So upon the preparation of that document, we, the city, will have a good understanding of whether there will be impacts. If so, what those are. We will vet those to the community to get comments, get feedback, and at that point in time, understand whether or what the potential impacts can be. So with that, Brett, I'm not sure if you have anything else to add.
Sorry, let me turn on my screen. Apologize. No, I think as we this issue was brought up during our council study session as well, is it's something that we're going to have to analyze, and as part of that analysis, we're going to be looking at a myriad of things, including the trade-offs between land use alternatives and the impacts. One thing that just to bring to the group's attention, I know Susan touched on this, is the city in this particular day and age is kind of looking at a myriad of issues that it has to grapple with, and that is the state has now made it a lot more focused in saying that all cities have to provide their fair share of housing. In the case of Burbank, what that means is that over the last 8-year cycle of our housing element, we were given 2,600 units to build, and we were on a clip of about maybe 500 of that. So as far as built out. Now, this time around, for the upcoming planning cycle, we are allocated 8,700 units in the next 8 years as our fair share obligation. So council looked at that and said, let's take a look at areas where we have all the infrastructure to be able to accommodate it, and looking collectively and comprehensively at these areas, where are there opportunities to provide housing so that we can maintain local control of development as opposed to having it dictated by the state. And that's kind of where we're at. So I think in many ways, we're going to be looking at all those impacts, including traffic, and looking at how we balance kind of state requirements, city needs, city wants, and also as part of that, not adversely impacting the people that live both within the planning area and adjacent to it. So it's not an easy task, but I think collectively working with the community, the council, and the consultant team, the hope is to get to a point where we can put something forward that maintains local control, meets state obligations, but does it in a way that provides for responsible development that helps build and protect neighborhoods.
Great, thank you, Fred. Rachel, have any other questions come in?
Yeah, we have a few more. So one is with regards to open space. And the question is there a way to include more open space? Burbank lacks park space in its neighborhood. This person would suggest more naturalized areas that offer refuge for local residents. And then also, do you see a shift away from office space considering COVID and the future of workspaces?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So with respect to open space, so the way the specific plan influences new open space is a few ways. So there's standards that have requirements related to private open space for each resident that lives in a new development. What's sometimes called common open space, which is the space that are shared between residents within a development. So this might be anything from a pool to a small landscaped area to community space, even indoors, for example, which is nice on a hot Burbank day. And then the sort of third bucket or area of open space would be public open space. It's not that common actually for developers to build public open space. It does happen sometimes, but this is something that we're looking at really closely is the potential for, at least in larger developments, to provide public open space. So it would be space maintained by the private developer. It would be at the majority at street level, adjacent to the street. So it's not hidden public space in the back of a development, for example. And so there's some great examples of how these new public plazas, sort of pocket parks, really well landscaped public spaces too, you mentioned that, are an opportunity within a district like this that is, it's industrial in its history. So open space wasn't the focus. So this is the way through private development that new open spaces can be developed. In addition, developments are required to pay impact fees related to the generation of new open space too, so the city can help fund additional open space that way. And then your second question, can you remind me, Rachel?
Sure. So it's about shifting away from office space considering COVID and the future of workspaces.
Yeah, that's a question that a lot of people are asking right now in the industry, including, real estate developers and economists. It's still a little too soon to tell exactly what's going to happen, but I think people are concerned that maybe office demand won't be what it was previously. Office kinds of uses do make up a lot of employment in the district. However, not all of these kinds of uses are things that can be done at home. And so in that way, this isn't a sort of regional office, Class A office core. There's actually a much more variety of types of employment generating uses. And so if these commercial uses aren't used for office space, there's potential for, we see a lot of, for example, back of house production space, editing space, essentially space supporting the entertainment industry. So it's not office space necessarily. So there's a lot of that kind of activity in the area. So even if the office demand softens, there's potential for other kinds of uses that might not be as connected to this shift that we're seeing from COVID. But the short answer is that I think we'll have to wait and see really what happens with office demand. Next question.
Great. Well, we are actually 1 minute out into the scoping meeting, so we can either answer one more question or move the rest to the second part of the Q&A session. I think a lot of the questions that have come in, well, this could be a very quick one.
Okay.
Won't Avion have to be torn down when high-speed rail is built?
Yeah, I can answer that quickly. So it is true that Avion development is on the site of the preferred location of high-speed rail. So I think as things progress on the high-speed rail front, that is something that the current property owner had to keep in mind when developing the current development. So the actual construction date is still several years away. And so that'll be a potential consequence. We don't know the exact year that will happen, but it might be a temporary use if the station is built there in the future. All right, let's shift to the CEQA. The presentation is about 6 or 7 minutes, and we'll give you a sense of what the environmental process is associated with this project, and then we can get back to questions. All right, so moving ahead here. Oh, I apologize. Why don't I take one more question, Rachel? I'm realizing I'm sharing the screen that had the facilitators workshop version. So let me close out of this. I'll answer one more question and I'll tee up the CEQA slides.
Okay, great. So there's a question about what is the plan from the city if the parcel is owned by a homeowner and the plan is to build industrial, etc., on the same property?
Can you ask that one more time? And it might be, Danny, if you're able to hop in on the question just so that I can focus on opening up the presentation, that would be great.
Yeah, I can share it one more time. What is the plan from the city if the parcel is owned by a homeowner and the plan is to build industrial, etc., on the same property?
So there are not any areas in the plan where there's currently like single family use that would be shifting to industrial. So if I'm understanding the question correctly, that wouldn't end up being a potential outcome.
And just adding to that, Susan, so one of the things that may have been noticed when looking at the alternatives was that the intent was to preserve and protect neighborhoods, specifically single family neighborhoods and multifamily neighborhoods that were existing. So for example, the balanced approach, you may have noticed that density in the multifamily and single family neighborhoods would remain the same. Again, the intent being that we were going to preserve and protect those. And as Susan mentioned, we're not currently looking at transitioning any residential land uses into another type of use for that specific reason.
And I'll just add one last thing, Susan, is I just want to go on record, since this is being recorded, that the intent of this project is not to displace any existing residential in those areas. So that is the directive from the council, and I wholeheartedly stand behind that approach. So the idea is to integrate, not to displace.
Thank you. All right, and I actually jumped ahead a little bit, Danny, before we get into CEQA. There's just a couple slides for you, and then we'll hand it off to Shannon.
Okay, thank you, Susan. So just quickly, in terms of timeline and next steps, right now we are hosting the second community workshop. As mentioned earlier, we do anticipate that we are going to have this before the council for consideration of adoption fall 2021. Between now and then, we are going to work on a draft specific plan document, an EIR document that will be vetted through the community in spring of 2021. So something to keep in mind. We are going to have a workshop similar to this one, hopefully in person, hoping that again, COVID goes away in the short term. And it's shown right now on the screen. But again, we do hope to have this before the council for adoption fall 2021. Next slide, Susan. And now we'll go ahead and move on to the public scoping portion of the meeting. As Susan mentioned, we will answer the remaining questions after the scoping portion meeting. And in addition to that, what we'll also do is we'll take the questions asked today. We'll make a questions and answers sheet that we will also post on our city webpage, on our project webpage. Thank you.
Thanks. All right, Shannon.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Shannon Ledette. I'm an environmental project manager with AECOM, and I'll be managing the preparation of the environmental impact report for this specific plan. And so we're just having a brief scoping meeting tonight, which is being completed under the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA. And so basically the purpose of the meeting tonight, the scoping meeting, is to give you all a chance to think about, some of the environmental issues that are important to you and to your community, and also to give you an opportunity to provide some comments on what you would like to see analyzed in the environmental impact report, and also let you know how you can comment further moving forward. Also, comments received will, inform the scope of the environmental impact report that we prepare. So they are important, and we encourage you to comment. And I will note that we do recommend that you submit your comments via email or regular mail, and you can also chat them in tonight, but if you can submit them in writing as well, that would be great. Next slide. So the CEQA process, just a little overview here. So it's required for all discretionary actions, which is basically any actions that require approval from a governing body, like a city agency, for instance. It informs the public and decision makers about a project. Also, discloses feasible ways to potentially avoid impacts, reduce impacts, provides mitigation measures that could also reduce impacts to a project. An EIR considers alternatives that are hopefully reduce impacts of the proposed project. Under an EIR, also, you can have significant and unavoidable impacts, which are those impacts that may not be able to be mitigated to a less than significant level. And in that case, the lead agency has to find that the benefits of the project outweigh that impact. And also one of the main purposes of CEQA, the CEQA process, is to get comments from the public on environmental issues. Okay, so here's a few EIR milestones here. They look similar probably to the previous slide that Danny just went over. So we're here with the circulation of the notice of preparation, and so that's a 30-day review period. We're at the public scoping meeting now to get your comments and to let you know how you can comment. The next step is to review the comments, prepare the draft EIR, and also the specific plan. The draft specific plan will be prepared as well. And then once that is completed in approximately spring of next year, we'll have the 45-day public review period for the draft EIR. And there'll be another opportunity for you to provide comments at a public hearing at that time. The next step after that would be preparing the final EIR, which includes response to comments. So basically we will be gathering all of the written comments on the draft EIR, reviewing them, and actually responding to each comment letter. And that will be included in the response to comments and final EIR. And then the next step would be certification in the fall of next year. And so here's a list of all of the environmental issue areas that we will be looking at in the draft EIR. And so because we did not prepare an initial study for this project, an initial study would usually scope out certain environmental topic areas that won't have an impact. Whereas for this project, we are choosing to analyze each environmental topic area in the EIR, so there'll be a section for each topic. So for instance, aesthetics, we'll analyze any potential changes to visual character. We'll be looking at scenic views and vistas as well in that section of the document. We will be analyzing air quality, greenhouse gas emissions, land use, and of course, traffic and transportation. That came up today as well. And then we'll be looking at alternatives, the no project alternative, as well as other project alternatives that may reduce impacts. Next slide. And so we're at the public scoping comment period for tonight. So you can submit comments on environmental issues. If you would like, you can submit them in the chat, the Zoom chat tonight, or you can also, we recommend submitting them in writing to Danny at the city, and his contact information is right there, and the email address as well. And then the deadline for comments is September 25th. So just want to point that out. And I think with that, we're gonna move on to see if we have any comments coming in, and I think I'll respond to them.
Yeah, so there is one that I think would be great to be answered by the CEQA team. So one is question about leftover pollution from old industrial uses. Is there any plan for further mitigation of any of this pollution prior to development, such as what was done with Empire Center, or has this been done already?
Yeah, good question. So as part of the EIR, we will be looking at hazards and hazardous materials. We will be looking at if there's any existing assessments out there for the parcels that are included in the district, and seeing where there are potential hazards within the district, and then of course providing mitigation measures for those parcels. And Freya, did you want to jump in on that as well?
I think that covers it. Essentially, we would be looking at all potential hazards, soil remediation, anything along those lines that would need to be dealt with as part of the project.
Great. Okay. So another one came in, and this is not necessarily environmentally related, but I will ask it since we are still having our Q&A session. As a local realtor, I'm finding it hard to find new housing for resale and lower price point small lot developments. Housing is a hot topic on my Burbank community pages. So Susan.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think we do hear that a lot. And I think that's why there was a focus in the guiding principles on a variety of housing types. Because so many people have been priced out of a single family home product, that providing townhome products, as you mentioned, a small lot product, which is essentially sort of a, for folks who aren't familiar with that term, they're like very small parcel development townhomes, but you own the parcel of land instead of being part of an HOA. And then also just units within large developments, medium and high scale developments that have maybe 3 and 4 bedroom units that might suit a family that is priced out of a single family home product. So that is a really important area that we're going to be exploring in making sure that we've got the development standards in place that would allow for potentially a small lot type of development or other kinds of multifamily developments to sort of help fill that void in housing production.
Great. Okay, so there's another question, and I think this could be best answered by you, Susan. Are the current industrial manufacturing buildings in the mixed-use corridor going to be forced to close by a certain future date?
No, so the way this would work is existing industrial properties are allowed to stay essentially for as long as they want, unless they were to turn over. So if the property owner, for example, sells their property and someone new comes in and the use leaves, then the new use is permitted. They would have to adhere to the new specific plan uses, but they would not, an operating business would not need to leave. So it's the kind of change that happens over the long term, over time, as sites change hands and businesses turn over.
Great, okay. So the next question could be answered either by you, Susan, or the city. So this is considering the condition of the area north of Cohasset. Is there any thought being given to approaching the city of Los Angeles about some kind of plan that would improve that area? Arguably, many people arriving at the quote Burbank Gateway will go north rather than south.
So do you know if the question is referring to improvements within the city of Los Angeles or improvements within our plan area just south of Cohasset?
So it doesn't mention specifically within the jurisdiction of Los Angeles. It's just north of Cohasset. So I think it's probably that kind of in-between period that there is a portion within our plan area, but the person might be asking for some guidance on collaboration with the city of Los Angeles about improving that general area north of Cohasset.
Yeah, so if that's what the question is about, we are coordinating with the city of Los Angeles However, our specific plan will not have purview over their area. And so they, as a city, might choose to build off of some of the improvements or changes that they're seeing in our area, but that wouldn't happen as part of our particular plan. With respect to the area to the south, within the city of Burbank, we're certainly being mindful of the type of neighborhood. It's a single family home neighborhood to the north. As this area potentially would transition into a higher intensity transit-oriented development area, making sure that we've got some good scale transitions in place. So there's some cohesion in terms of the urban design that doesn't just stop at the city boundary.
Okay, great. The next question I think could be a dual part, one answered by Fariha as part of CEQA, and then maybe one part for you, Susan, as part of development standards. So the question is, the airport has stated in the past that once the old terminal is torn down, some flights will take off to the east over the proposed homes. Will the airport be soundproofing the new buildings?
The new buildings that potentially would be developed as part of the specific plan. So I don't want to answer that for the airport, and Daniel or Fred or Scott, feel free to pipe in. But to my knowledge, they wouldn't be funding any noise mitigation from development that's not already on the ground.
I can answer that question. If there's going to be new development that is built in the civic plan area, the developer would be responsible for soundproofing the development to mitigate the noise from the airport.
Thank you, Scott.
Great. Okay, so the next question is around a potential Amazon distribution coming to the Avion. And I think the question is, it's not official, but it was confirmed by Scion or Council replying a no that it's happening. I think the person is wondering about traffic and pollution impacts if Amazon distribution is coming to the Avion.
Scott, are you able to respond to that, or Fred?
So just to respond to that, as part of the development agreement and plan development and EIR for the Avion project, we did look at a potential distribution center in that site. And the EIR did analyze one of the uses that is allowed there is a distribution center, and the EIR did consider that use. So if a distribution center does move into that site, there are mitigations in the EIR that they would have to follow.
So a little time check. We do have 1 minute before 8. How many questions do we have in the queue, Rachel?
So there's one more.
Okay.
There's a little bit more detail that was added to the Amazon Prime Distribution Center, but I think, Scott, your answer with regards to the environmental impact report in relation to noise and curfew can be answered through that answer that you had. So this second part of the question is, the person wants to confirm that there's a state mandatory housing units or a state mandated housing units of 8,000 by 2035. And if so, why is the city's goal 12,000?
Here, I can go back up. Fred, I think you might be the best person. Yeah, I'm just going to go to the relevant slide while you're talking.
Sure. So there's two things at play. In this case, our cycle for our housing element update is every 8 years. The last update took us through 2021, which is coming up. And then the next 8-year cycle will be 8 years from that point forward. So in the last cycle that we're currently under, we had a RHNA, Regional Housing Need Assessments allocation of 2687, I think is the number. And we probably built maybe 500 up until about 4 years ago, when the current council really made a concerted effort to try to, for better or for worse, reduce the jobs to housing imbalance. And they were very visionary, I would think, in the approach, which was to set a goal of 12,000 units citywide in the next 15 years, which would effectively take us through two planning cycles for our housing element. So the current one that's coming up in the next 8 years is the state is saying, hey, Burbank, you need to build 8,752 new units, and those are run a range of very low, moderate, and then market rate units. So what we are doing through this process, with council's guidance, is looking at areas along the I-5 corridor, including the Golden State area, the specific plan that we're under today, as well as downtown Burbank. I think Danny mentioned that particular specific plan area is also being looked at as opportunities to maybe build housing in near and adjacent to high employment centers and high transit-rich facilities. Do it in a way that accommodates. We have a huge jobs to housing imbalance. So even with these numbers, we are far from like leveling out or saying we're going to be 1-to-1, one job per housing unit, but we're making a concerted effort to do that in a way that still retains that character and community sense that is specifically Burbank, but do it in a way where we maintain local control so that we can meet our obligations from the state mandate, but do it in a way that is responsible and doesn't adversely impact the existing neighborhood. So do it in these areas versus having it in your backyard is an approach that I think merits some discussion with the community and the council.
Thank you. So we are a little after 8. If there's any, is there any last question that we can take? Or was that it?
There's 2 questions that have come in from the same person. They're quite long. And I don't want to bring one up if it's a 3-part. It looks like it might be a 3-part question.
Okay.
Is there a desire to stay on to answer the question, or would the city like to kind of collect the comments and then respond to each of them after the webinar?
For our sake, could we maybe hear the question and then we'll decide whether we can I mean,
Sure.
I'm all, the idea of this is to get input from the community. So
Yeah.
we can go on record with it, whether we can answer it now or if it takes a lot more time, we can follow up with more detailed feedback.
Okay, wonderful. So
Hey, Rachel, before we do answer that one question, I just do want to end for anyone who hops off. Please do visit our website at goldenstatedistrict.com. It will provide the materials that you've seen tonight. And there is a survey that we'll be posting in the next couple of days that will allow you to provide additional comments on each of the sub areas to give you a little more time to mull over what you heard tonight and give us feedback. So please do visit goldenstatedistrict.com. All right, take it away, Rachel.
All right, so reading this, it's actually more of a comment, but if there's anything to add either, during this Q&A or as a follow-up, we can do that. So I'll just go ahead and read it. So comments from the owner of the property at 3300 to 3320 San Fernando Boulevard, which is located within one of the 3, quote, opportunity sites identified in the draft land use concept. The opportunity site is bound by Cohasset, San Fernando, Lima, and Avon. Okay. First, we support the draft specific plan and concept plan and are interested in pursuing development as envisioned by the city and working in cooperation with the city. We believe that the 200 dwelling unit density for the mixed use district is a bit low and support increased residential density for that district. We have conducted some preliminary analyses regarding what sort of project could be built within the stated parameters of the concept plan and would be supported by the market, and conclude that more than 200 DUs per acre could comfortably fit within the 8 to 12 story building envelope. For example, a 235 unit per acre project, a 200 unit within 35% density bonus for inclusion of affordable housing is a product that the market would support. Perhaps the city should consider regulating density by height, similar to the city of Los Angeles zoning, rather than by dwelling unit. And that last part that I just read out is a question. I can read it.
I can address that. And the city might pipe in. So I think what they're suggesting is right now we use a calculation called DUs per acre, which limits the number of dwelling units per acre as a sort of tool to control the amount of housing units produced. And I think what the person is suggesting is that potentially instead of using that as a way to regulate development is to just rely on heights alone. So that's not something I can answer quickly, but it's certainly a point that we can take for consideration when we're drafting the development standards.
Great. Okay, so the second part of the question is with regards to parking and proximity to transit. So the person's client's property is located in close proximity to multiple modes of transit. It's within a few blocks less than 1,000 feet of both the Burbank Airport, North Metrolink Station, as well as multiple bus stops. Will the city consider including TOD benefits to encourage development near transit? For example, would there be options for reduced on-site parking for projects that are located near transit and residents could presumably use mass transit, shared ride stations, bicycle parking?
Yeah, is that the end of the question?
It is, yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, so one of the things that we'll be looking to do, particularly in the areas near the transit stations, is have a really flexible parking approach. What we've seen nationally in TOD areas is the demand for parking is generally not as high as non-TOD areas. So many parking supply studies have shown that parking is built and it's underused in these areas that are really transit rich. So there's things that can be done in terms of making sure that parking is not overproduced. So we don't have a parking requirement that's too high that doesn't really fit the modes that would be used in that area. We'd also look for ways that different uses can share parking at different times of the day to provide more flexibility, to also add bike parking requirements. So cyclists have a place to park their bike, and it really encourages cycling use as well. So the short answer is that, yes, we're going to be really looking at creative approaches to parking, particularly in these TOD sub areas right next to transit.
If I can add, Susan, just one thing, just from the standpoint of our elected officials, is we go into this with the understanding that we're going to look at innovative ways of incorporating transit-oriented development concepts. But at the same time, I mean, we go into this with eyes wide open that we're kind of in a state of transition. So there's still the need for parking. And I think one of the things that the council has been really good at is that they've actually tasked the city with actually coming up with a parking management plan that is citywide. And that would be incorporated or would be looked at as part of this upcoming analysis. But good point taken. If there are amenities that would be provided in other projects we've done in the city recently, we've actually looked at transit passes in lieu of parking, or shared parking, or unbundled parking as an approach, in combination with the fact that certain density bonus projects under state law actually require reduced parking standards and to be made available to developers. So all those things are things to consider. So thank you for that question.
All right. So I think that wraps it up for this evening. It's 8:10. Yeah. So we really appreciate everyone's attendance. Danny, I'm going to hand it over to you for a final thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Susan. So as Susan mentioned, we thank you all for attending tonight's workshop. And as she mentioned, if you have any follow-up questions, please feel free to go to our project webpage, which will have all this information available in the coming days. And in addition to that, if you have any specific questions that you want to talk to city staff about, feel free to reach out to me at the email that was provided earlier. I'll say it out loud just now for the group. The email is D as in Danny, V as in Victor, ILLA dvia@burbankca.gov. Again, dvia@burbankca.gov. Thank you all for coming, and that concludes this meeting. Have a good night.